For non-release of President Duterte's statement of assets, liabilities, and net worth. The Justice Department has made public the implementing rules and regulations of the anti-terror law. Critics say it only reinforces the measure's questionable provisions. And the Commission on Human Rights is flagging a learning module for supposedly teaching students not to join peaceful protests. The Transportation Department is now gradually raising train capacity to 50% after reducing the required distancing measures inside trains. But with COVID-19 still present, passengers fear they may contract the virus from riding trains. Gerard de la Peña tells us more with this report.
Markings inside MRT3 coaches have been reconfigured so that passengers will be placed 2 seats apart. The management has also put up markings for standing commuters. The LRT Line 1, meanwhile, has removed the X marks on alternate seats. Passengers will now be seated side by side and separated by plastic barriers.
Ginawa muna natin 30% and then we will observe kung kailan at applicable na yung 50% para naman mapaghandaan ng MRT3 at mapaghandaan din ng ating mga mananakay.
The Transportation Department and the IATF have approved to increase train ridership starting today. The LRT Line 2 and the Philippine National Railways have also been allowed to increase passenger capacity to 30% from 13%. Transport officials hope that the move will translate to more commuters and shorter queues. The waiting time at MRT stations have been decreased after the replacement of rails. Train officials, however, admit that imposing health protocols will be more challenging.
Ang biggest challenge lang naman dyan, yung medyo nagdidikit-dikit na from 1 meter to probably 0.25, 1 seat apart.
Some commuters say the increased capacity in PUVs could be worrisome.
Actually, may takot din talaga kasi the closer, so mas prone to infection.
Nakakatakot yan, ha? Kunti mo mga bata rin, magiging risk din ang life nila, di ba? Kaya nga kami, sabi ko, buti na lang, may mga ganito, may mga shield, may mga face mask, mapuprotection lang kami.
The Light Rail Manila Corporation, however, is allaying the fears.
Internally, meron pong kinonduct yung study ang aming Health, Safety, Environment, and Quality Department. Nag-simulate kami using blow germ mist. And we can confirm na from those findings, even with PPs, nakokontrol yung dispersion of respiratory droplet.
The DOTR says it will eventually increase passenger capacity of trains to 50%. For News 5, Gerard de la Peña, we are One News.
Meanwhile, government says it is now just waiting for approval of a House resolution that seeks to allow motorcycle taxis to resume operations. Trade Secretary Mon Lopez spoke to Radyo 5 earlier today about the need to gradually reopen the economy further, including the need for safer modes of transportation. The IATF previously expressed support for the resumption of a pilot study involving motorcycle ride-hailing services such as Angkas. The Interior Department, meanwhile, announced that physical barriers will be required once motorcycle taxis resume operations. Passengers are also encouraged to bring their own helmets. The reopening of leisure services, meanwhile, such as cinemas in Metro Manila, malls, will have to wait until the capital region is under MGCQ. In a public briefing, Lopez said several sectors crucial to economic activity have already been opened.
Kahit under GCQ po ang Metro Manila at yung mga katabing bayan, tayo po ay nakakapagluwag din ng ekonomiya by opening sectors to be allowed under GCQ. Sa madaling salita, hindi po kinakailangan sa ngayon na ipilit nating mag-modify GCQ.
And more people in Metro Manila are now able to profess their faith as the city's churches start accepting more parishioners. Romel Lopez tells us about the national capital's policies for those who want to hear Mass.
A Nazareno devotee, Linda, was so emotional after hearing today's Mass in Quiapo. She came all the way from Bulacan.
Wala po tumutulong sa ibang tao sa amin. Ba't nga ko pumunta dito sa kanya kung humingi ng tulong po sa bahay? Sa taas po.
Linda's visit to Quiapo came at the heels of an order allowing Manila churches to open up to 30% of its capacity from the previous 10%. Clergy members are more than happy with this development.
Laking pagpapasalamat namin kay Mayor Isko na kanyang idinulog sa IATF yung aming pakiusap na taasan ng konti yung seating capacity na nire-request namin na 30%. So para sa amin masaya yon na para sa amin na mas maraming tao ngayon ang makakapasok na sa loob ng simbahan.
Stricter quarantine protocols are enforced, churchgoers must undergo temperature checks, and physical distancing must be observed. Churches have to be disinfected after every Mass. Manila, however, will only allow those 18 to 65 years old to go out. This is stricter than the recommendation of the Interagency Task Force on Emerging Infectious Diseases, permitting 15 years old to go out.
Yung 18 mas lumabas kasi at least yung 18 na legal na magtrabaho. Yung mga 15, 16, hindi naman po pwede magtrabaho yan. So much more sila sa leisure, no?
Metro Manila mayors also want to relax curfew hours starting December to pave the way for Simbang Gabi. They are proposing curfew hours to be from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. from the current 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. The MMDA, however, clarified that they will still depend on the LGU's discretion. Navotas, for instance, will still observe curfew hours from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. Paulina and her son Jake sees the relaxed measure as an opportunity to make more money.
Masaya po kasi nakatulong po ang aking anak sa pagtitinda.
Masaya po kasi nakakabor yung sa bahay. Yan po, tsaka nakakatulong na rin po sa parents ko.
JJ, for his part, took the opportunity to go to the barber shop to have his hair trimmed after a long while.
Kasi po matagal na po kami hindi napagpagupit Kaya pupunta ako sa barber kasi mainit na po.
But for Metro residents like Romeo, stricter curfew hours are still better for one simple reason.
Pabura ko may curfew para yung mga nagkakalat ng mga tambay.
Authorities still have misgivings about placing NCR under the least restrictive modified general community quarantine.
Mas mahirap na EMGCQ mo na 100%, saka mababawasan Magkakaroon ng resistance yan at ang hirap i-control. Unlike yung GCQ tayo, tapos gradually tayo nag-increase ng mga capacity.
In any case, Garcia thinks that the Metro Manila citizens are responsible enough to follow minimum health protocols when going outside. For News 5, Rami Lopez. We are One News.
Several tourist spots in the country are set to open to visitors amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The tourism department says Ilocos provinces and Baguio will reopen doors to travelers from Luzon, including GCQ areas like Metro Manila. Tourism Secretary Bernadette Romulo Puyat announced that Ilocos Norte will start accepting tourists on October 20, Baguio on October 22 to 23, and Ilocos Sur on November 15. The DOT also launched a website listing down the tourist spots in the provinces which are open to Filipino tourists. Meanwhile, flag carrier Philippine Airlines is optimistic that the resumption of non-essential outbound travels for Filipinos will jumpstart passenger demand. ALA spokesperson Cielo Villaluna said the carrier is currently operating at 17% to 20% of its normal flight frequencies before the pandemic.
Kami po ay naniniwala na ito ay magkakaroon or this will lead to a jump starting or a restarting of international travel at dadami po ang ating mga pasahero. Right now, it is wait and see.
Let's pause for a quick break. When the big story returns. The palace maintains that it is not going against policies in transparency amid the non-release of President Duterte's salience since 2018. And the Education Department downplays a module circulating online which supposedly discourages students from joining protests. The details next. Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. House lawmakers have tackled amendments in the 2021 national budget, even as the lower house is under recess. They vow to transmit the budget to the Senate on time to give senators ample time to review. Ria Fernandez with the story.
The timely passage on third.
Even though House lawmakers successfully beat the deadline to pass the 2021 budget, they could not immediately transmit it to the Senate. Earlier today, they held a small committee meeting to tackle amendments sought by various agencies such as the Health Department. Appropriations Chairperson Eric Yap said the DOH is asking for an additional 17 billion pesos. The extra funding will be used for facilities and procurement of COVID-19 vaccines, which only has an initial 2.5 billion peso allocation.
Kailangan natin maghanap ng pondo kung sinong agency ang pwede mag-give up ng pondo para doon.
But according to Albay Representative Joey Salceda, the small committee only approved 20 billion pesos worth of amendments. This includes 5.5 billion pesos for the vaccines, 4 billion pesos for displaced workers, and 1.7 billion pesos for the internet under the blended learning setup.
My proposal is that usually there's been virtually 300% increase in the DOTR. 20 billion from 30 to 110 billion. Tapos may mga ang DOTR naman po, ang kanilang mga projects are foreign funded.
Salceda added that the additional budget needed by the DOH may also be sourced from disaster funds. Meanwhile, the small committee failed to discuss the supposed unequal distribution of infrastructure projects. Recall that allies of Speaker Velasco claimed that huge funds were allocated for the districts of former House Leader Alan Peter Cayetano and his supporters.
Hindi naman sa tinapon namin, but we have allowed the departments. That's why nakita mo yung departmental errata to essentially give them the, kasi sila hindi naman House po ang nag-distribute o ang nag-allocate. Sino yung allocation naman? Based po talaga yan sa needs ng constituents, pati na rin po consistency with the national goals, like let's say the national backbone. So we allow the department to essentially correct those iniquities.
Yap assured the public that the process of amendments will be constitutional and will not be prone to illegal insertions.
Sa Congress, hindi kami gumagawa ng mga illegal nang wala sa rules. Here in Congress, we live by rules, not by law.
After finalizing the amendments, the lower chamber will begin encoding the spending bill. Lawmakers aim to submit its soft copy to the upper chamber by October 28. For News 5, Ria Fernandez, We Are One News.
Meanwhile, the House Minority Bloc announced the election of Abang Lingkod Party List Representative Joseph Stephen Paduano as the new minority leader. This was after Manila's 6th District Representative Benny Abante stepped down from his post to join the Majority Bloc. Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez has expressed willingness to lead the PhilHealth Board. That's after Senate President Tito Soto filed a bill seeking to transfer the PhilHealth Board chairmanship from the Health Department to the Department of Finance. Dominguez will also be required to oversee all board actions without any proxy should the amendment push through. His first order of business will be to plug leakages in the agency hounded by corruption allegations.
If the job is given to me, which I do not seek, I will do my best to do it, to implement it.
PhilHealth, meanwhile, is promising to pay the Philippine Red Cross its 931 million peso debt. The PRC was forced to stop its COVID-19 swab testing over the state insurer's failure to settle its dues.
Yan po ay kinikilala po talaga namin na aming pananagutan sa aming partner sa Philippine Red Cross. Humihingi lamang po kami ng kaunti pang pangunawa sapagkat ito naman ay bahagi din ng kumbaga maayos na pamamahala po.
And these are the other big stories today. Pag-asa has raised signal number 1 over the eastern part of Isabela and the northern part of Aurora due to the tropical depression Pepito. Pipito is located 475 kilometers east of Dirac, Catanduanes. It is packing maximum winds of 45 to 55 kilometers per hour, moving west at 30 kilometers per hour. Rains are expected in Quezon, Bicol, Eastern Visayas, Zamboanga Peninsula, Bangsamoro, Caraga, Davao Region, Sultan Kudarat, South Cotabato, and Sarangani. The palace says it will leave it up to the Office of the Ombudsman to respond to queries seeking President Duterte's statement of assets, liabilities, and net worth. Over the weekend, the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism came out with the SALN of every president, from President Cory Aquino to Duterte's 2017 report, the last one he made available to the public. The Ombudsman released a memorandum in September limiting access to SALNs to an authorized representative of the one petitioning for it. Malacanang says they are not against transparency and are just following the Ombudsman's latest policies. The latest SWS survey shows nearly half of Filipino adults finding the government's response to joblessness inadequate in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. 46% from the nationwide survey last month thinks the government is not doing enough to ensure that Filipinos who lost their jobs are supported and given livelihood. 71%, however, said the government was able to relay enough information and awareness about the virus. 61% approved of the contact tracing efforts. 54% said they were glad with the administration's actions to ensure the affordability of COVID-19 testing across the country. The Commission on Human Rights is flagging a learning module that is now making rounds online for supposedly encouraging students not to join protests. DepEd disowned the said module, saying it did not undergo any quality checks. Marian Enriquez has this report.
Photos of a grade 12 module for media and information literacy made rounds on social media over the weekend. The activity asked students, if given the chance, will you join this rally? Why or why not? The answer key in the module read, no, because the government has really been doing their best for all Filipino and their constituents. For the Commission on Human Rights, this module sends the wrong message to students as it portrays protests or peaceful assemblies as wrong. The Commission noted that patriotism does not mean blind obedience, and while respect for the law is a good value to teach, it is equally important to develop critical thinking among students, especially on national issues. The Department of Education, meanwhile, clarified that the said module did not undergo conformance review from the central office. It is now investigating which schools are using this.
Hindi pa siya fully certified kasi may mga issue pa kami. So ako personally, hindi naman ako papayag na ganun yung tono ng option. Yung tanong yata tama, pero yung key to correction ay mukhang may issue talaga doon.
DepEd Undersecretary Diosdado San Antonio added that the module is not included in their streamlined learning competencies this school year. The palace also said that the government is not discouraging anyone to attend rallies, but there are exemptions.
Kung sinasabi lang ng DepEd, yung mga elementary at high school, siguro wag muna mag-attend ng mga rallies, no? Pero as I said, DepEd will be in a better position to address this. Hindi naman po ito para sa mga matatanda ng mga estudyante. Ito po ay para sa mga bata.
Meanwhile, DepEd urges the public to report any mistakes or issues that may be found in their self-learning modules or in their TV episodes. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
Let's pause for a quick break. When we return, critics say the implementing rules and regulations for the anti-terror law only reiterate its questionable provisions. And those who recovered from COVID-19 are still experiencing symptoms long after testing negative. Why is this? Find out after the break. Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. Critics of the controversial anti-terror law are questioning the unconstitutional provisions of the act after the Justice Department released its implementing rules and regulations. Marlene Alcaide tells us what these vague provisions are.
3 months after its enactment and 37 legal challenges before the Supreme Court, the Justice Department has released the implementing rules and regulations of Republic Act 11479 or the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. The IRR clarified contested provisions in the law, such as the warrantless arrest for suspected terrorists.
Any arrest, based on Section 29, it has to be based on probable cause.
The law gives the Anti-Terror Council power to authorize law enforcers to detain suspects for as long as 24 days without a warrant. But the IRR requires law enforcers to first submit a sworn affidavit to the ATC before they could detain suspects.
It's not the ATC that authorizes the arrest. No, what it authorizes is detention for an extended period. Kasi nakikita operationally that maybe we need to find out more about yung planong gawin nitong terorista natin na nahuli natin or suspected terrorist.
Law enforcers are also given 48 hours to notify a judge in writing about an arrested or detained suspect, something that critics oppose.
Ang original proposal ko dyan, personally, was 24 hours. Pero sabi nga ng ating mga law enforcement agents, there are really areas, like for instance in Mindanao, sabi nga nila, the situation on the ground really makes it difficult, yung sobrang immediate na notice to the judge.
Another contested provision in the law is the Council's power to designate people or a certain group as terrorists. Designated terrorists are given 15 days to file a verified request before the ATC to have themselves delisted. Even with the IRR, petitioner says the anti-terror law remains unconstitutional. Deputy Minority Leader and Bayan Muna Representative Carlos Zarate says the IRR did not water down the contentious provisions but only reiterated it. Zarate added that the IRR should also be stricken down by the court. Integrated Bar of the Philippines President Cayosa thanked the DOJ for its efforts but said that the IRR won't be able to cure the law's defects.
Sa IRR, malinaw din na binigyan yung ATC pa rin ng poder na mag-authorize nga ng detention of terrorist suspect from 14 to 24 days. Bawal na bawal din sa Constitution because wala ng checks and balances. So that's one. And there are a few others.
Cayosa also warned that everyone may be affected by the law. With the publication of the anti-terror law's IRR, petitioners are just waiting for the Supreme Court to act on its supposed questionable provisions. For News 5, Marlene Alcaide, we are One News.
The Health Department is asking for an additional 12.1 billion pesos for the impending nationwide COVID-19 vaccination. This comes after Marikina Congresswoman Stella Kimbo questioned if the department's 2.5 billion vaccine budget would cut it. In an online press briefing, Health Undersecretary Maria Rosario Vergere said the department will consider applying for loans from Land Bank and the Development Bank of the Philippines to shore up its COVID-19 immunization fund as needed.
Yung mga pauna lang na mga tentative or initial na mga costing and estimate, and we multiply this by the number of those in.
The DOH is meanwhile warning the public about the so-called long COVID or the ongoing illness even after being tagged as having recovered from the virus. Patients with long COVID often run out of breath easily. Others also experience memory lapses. Vergere urged all recovered patients to frequently undergo checkups. In sports, the TNT Tropang Giga remains unscathed in the Philippine Cup after beating the Phoenix Super LPG 110-91. Roger Pogoy was hailed best player of the game with 30 points and 5 rebounds. TNT was trailing in the first half but recovered via a 15-3 run. Matthew Wright tallied 31 points for Phoenix. Meanwhile, PBA Commissioner Willie Marshall happily announced that PBA teams inside the Clark bubble have tested negative anew following their latest swab tests. All 12 PBA team players and staff are required to undergo swab testing every 2 weeks. Meanwhile, those players who arrived late in the bubble are still scheduled to be tested along with other members of the PBA staff. With the string of new shows in the Kapatid Network, TV5 Chairman Mandy Pangilinan is hinting there's more to come. Pangilinan says the influx of new entertainment shows is a good problem to have as it attracts more viewers. He says the viewing public can expect more organic and acquired content in the coming months. That would include sports programs as talks to have the UAAP and NCAA air on TV5 are underway.
Kasi dati nag-switch ang TV5 to pure news and sports. Now, we now have a more entertainment programs and better ones that we're seeing. But there's more room for improvement, I think, on that side.
Thailand continues to grapple with major unrest in its capital as thousands of pro-democracy protesters have taken over key intersections in Bangkok, defying government orders for the fourth straight day. Unlike last week, police this time made no immediate steps to intervene as protesters took over two of Bangkok's most important transport hubs. Crowd estimate was pegged at around 10,000. That's according to the police. The protesters, who were clad in colorful raincoats, continue to call for the ouster of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, a former junta leader. They accused Prayut of engineering last year's election to stay in power and the monarchy for helping the military prolong its political influence. The protesters also seek for reforms in the monarchy and the release of political prisoners. And that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow, 8 p.m., Signal Channels 8 and 250. Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. I'm Robbie Alampay, and we are One News. Good evening.